writing this book and all the hundreds and hundreds of studies that we read in the process has changed your outlook on your relationship with your dogs?
If anything, it has made me appreciate my dogs more, both the dog I have currently and my past dogs. I actually have grown to see...
You're just getting an echo off of that. It's fine as long as you ignore it.
I'll ignore it. It has given me a new lens through which to view my current relationship with my dog, as well as previous dogs who have passed away, and just made me realize how incredibly lucky I am to have had these magnificent creatures in my life. They have been so adoring and so watchful and so much fun. And often when we go and adopt a dog or rescue a dog, we think that we're doing something good for the dog, but actually we're doing something really good for ourselves, because it is just a fabulous way of having unconditional love, playfulness, joy, and the like in your home. So what would you say?
I don't know that it changed that much. I feel like this is a difference between us.
Yeah.
Like, we're writing another book that'll come out in a couple years, so you don't get too excited. We still haven't even started yet. But we were talking about the book. Stacy was like, we could talk about lessons that people have learned from their dogs. And I was like, but did you really learn that from your dog? Like, didn't you know that beforehand? And she, I think, like 100%, like, you have that kind of sentimentality and reflection on your relationship with your dogs. And I love mine, obviously, very much, right? But I feel like I have kind of been validated. I don't think it's really changed my perspective, but it's given me ammunition against dumb people who tell me that I'm wrong. A story that I tell is that when I was in 6th grade, I had a teacher who told me that dogs don't actually love us back. They just lick us because we're salty. And I was real mad, but I was 11. And so I couldn't really argue back. And so this book would have been really useful to like 11-year-old me. To have all of this science behind it. So I don't think it changed the way that I think about my relationship with my dogs, but it definitely changed the way I think about the evidence behind how I feel, which is pretty cool.
Well, let me give an example of how it changed my outlook with a previous dog. So when we had my first rescue dog as an adult, Wolfie, and Wolfie was a handful. He was a wonderful dog, but kind of a badass, and a little difficult, maybe more than a little difficult. But we loved him anyway. Anyway, so when I had my second child, we had developed a routine with my older son, who was then 5, reading bedtime stories before bed. And Nick, the baby, Nate, my 5-year-old, and I would snuggle up on Nate's bed, and Wolfie would lie on the floor, and I'd read stories, usually 3 to 5. Story time was a favorite time. And inevitably, at a certain point, Nick would need to go have his diaper changed, or it would be time for him to go to bed. And Nate would continue reading. He was learning to read on his own at the time, and he would get on the floor with a little blanket and read to Wolfie. And I'd come back in, and he'd say, "We're having our own story time." And of course, I thought this was absolutely adorable, and it was. But after all the research that we did, we came across all these studies that have found that dogs actually facilitate learning for kids, including learning to read, because they're a non-judgmental form of social support. They keep a child company and ease their stress. The dog is not going to point out that the child mispronounced a word and that kind of thing. And I think that reading to Wolfie helped Nate develop a real love of reading at an early age. And I wouldn't have realized that without this research. So that's what I mean by kind of looking at our relationships through a different lens. Because, you know, I knew that we loved our dogs, I knew what we did with them, but now I know the why, like why it was so helpful and beneficial for us all.
So what is your favorite, most surprising result that we came across in the book?
Well, speaking of loving our dogs, one of the things that really blew my mind and I continue to appreciate is just how much the bond with our dogs affects us both on a physiological level. It's not just emotional. It's not just that we love each other and that makes us happy, end of story. So, for example, when you pet your dog or look into your dog's eyes, after a certain amount of time, as little as like 3 to 5 minutes, really, you both get this incredible surge of oxytocin. Oxytocin is often called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone because it's released when new mothers nurse their babies or when couples cuddle with each other. But you get it from looking in your dog's eyes or petting your dogs, and your dog feels it too. That's pretty amazing. Similarly, we influence each other's microbiomes. We share a home, we share dust and germs. It's not all icky. We actually, when we pet them, we all have a microbiome on our skin as well as in our guts. And we transfer microbes between us, and it changes the nature of our microbiomes for both of us. I mean, that's just fascinating to me. The fact that at a physiological level, deep down inside, we can influence each other so profoundly. So what about you?
I've got a few favorites, but I think one that I really liked is a thing that I think if you have a dog, you've experienced, which is your dog is how you meet everybody in your neighborhood, and like you don't know their people's names, but you know their dogs' names, and like that's okay. Dean Koontz writes about this, so he's, if you guys know him, very famous, popular horror writer. If only we could sell the number of books that he sells. But he's a golden retriever rescuer, and he writes about how someone in his neighborhood eventually figured out who he was. I mean, he's very famous, and she's like, "Oh, I had no idea. You were just like Murphy's dad." And I'm so sorry. And he's like, I don't care if you know who I am. Like, Murphy's the important one, right? So like, of course you know this if you own a dog, but when we were writing the communities chapter of the book, we found this really interesting study that said in communities who have a lot of dogs, there's a higher sense of civic responsibility and a higher sense of community cohesion, even among people who don't own dogs. So the whole community tends to be brought together in a stronger way if there's more dogs in the neighborhood. And that's likely because you see a lot of your neighbors outside more because they're walking their dogs. When you see them, they tend to be having positive interactions. I mean, there's always complainers about the dogs in a neighborhood. But generally, you see people out more, you know who they are, even if it's just in like a passive recognition way. And so that makes your whole community tighter. And I thought that was pretty cool that like even if you don't have a dog, you benefit from them existing in your universe, which was fun.
And that translates into lower crime rates too, right?
I think so. I
Yeah,
haven't read
I
that
remember-
study in like 18 months, Stacy.
I know, but you uncovered a study that found that, and that's pretty amazing.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad you remember that. We read like 500 studies for this book, so I don't have all those details accessible. Good. So, okay, so we've talked about the school part, we've talked about the community part, you've talked about the oxytocin, which I know is like your favorite study in there.
It is.
Yeah. So how was the process for you of writing this book?
You're right here, you know.
I'm
joking.
I've got no ego. You can tell them everything.
I'm joking. Actually, this entire project was a labor of love. When I was first approached about meeting Jen and discussing this project, I wasn't sure I had the bandwidth to take on another book. But then when we met via Zoom in September of 2020, we just hit it off immediately. And part of what we bonded over, this is really dark, so get ready for it, is I had lost our dog, we had lost our dog, Inky, a month before. And I was still really emotional about it, and Jen had come up with an outline, a preliminary outline for her ideas for the book, and I looked at it and I really liked it. But I thought, there really should be something about growing older with a dog, both of you aging together, and also the loss of a dog, because as any of us can attest to who have lost a dog, it really smacks you upside the head. You just do not see that level of devastation coming. And so we talked about that and agreed on that in the initial Zoom call. And I started getting emotional, and then Jen started getting emotional because she had lost 2 of her golden retrievers in the previous 6 months. And so we were very like-minded about these issues. And all of a sudden, Sadie, my new dog, pushed open my office door, came in, and jumped on my lap. And Jen said, "Well, who's this?" And I introduced Sadie, and we just like really clicked about it. We on all of this. And then we had a really collaborative process going back and forth through the entire book. It took us about 9 months to come up with a really strong proposal, and then another year to actually write the book. But I would say that of all the books I've written, about a dozen with other people over the years, this was the smoothest, most joyful, most seamless process that I've had. So what was it like for you?
A thing I told Stacy when we did an interview yesterday that surprised her that John might appreciate is that part of the reason this went so smoothly is because it was my first book I've written for like regular people and not academics. And so when we'd have a conflict, I would just let Stacy do what she wanted. And
I actually don't think that's entirely true, but that's okay.
if there were a few where I felt really strongly, we'd kind of work it out. But most of the time, I'd be like, yeah, okay, that's fine. We can do what you want. It's good advice for marriages and book collaborations.
That
if
is
you
actually
don't care
true.
that much, you can just let them have the thing that they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So since this was your first book for a mass audience, what surprised you about the process? Like, what really came as a surprise, and what stumbling blocks did you not anticipate?
A thing that I think so. I had started working on this book on my own first, and written a couple sample chapters that were very science-y because I am a scientist, and that's when my book agent was like, maybe you should work with a writer on this. And I'm like, okay. So I knew that was a thing that had to happen. It is a place where stylistically I still struggle. Like, I think the book is beautifully written and it's accessible and it echoes with people. But I read the audiobook version also, and when I was reading it, I was like, man, like there's stuff in here that's like definitely not what I would write. And we actually, like, one of our early on, I don't want to say fights, but discussions was I was like, I don't want to call them fluffy friends.
Oh, I didn't either. That was
Why
Danielle.
is that phrase in there all the time then, Stacey?
Furry, not fluffy. Furry, not fluffy. Yeah.
All right, we're drawing a distinction on like the wrong part of the line here. Furry friends, still no for me. Canine companions, not so much. Beloved creatures, not a thing I would write. And I was like, Stacey, it's not really me. And she's like, well, what do you want to say? And I was like, I wanted to say dog.
You can't say dogs 20,000 times in a book. You just can't. Your editor won't let you.
You absolutely could, and we didn't. This is the thing that I just let Stacey win on. And I think it reads like much more heartwarming than if I had written it, right? I'm not saying that this was bad, but as a scientist, it's a thing that I really struggle with, right? Because like I want to write it kind of science-y. And you are very good at writing for the general public in a way that is emotionally resonant, which is not what scientists do. So that has been like quite a process for me, and one that I still struggle with reading the book. Is not that I think the book is bad, right? But I just go
well,
like,
I'm glad to hear that.
Not my voice. Clearly not my voice. Also, like, we don't do this stuff when you write science. Right? Like, talk to people about the book. Like, we'll do conference presentations, and you get a couple confrontational, like, comments disguised as questions at the end one time, and that's it. So going out and talking about it has been like super fun, but I was not anticipating like how much of that there would be or how much work it would be.
Honestly, this is the most I've ever experienced too.
That's good.
So,
it's been a good time.
Yeah. Actually, on Monday night, we were in Chicago doing something like this, and afterwards we were signing books. And this couple that had been seated in the front row came up and asked us to sign their books and take a selfie with us. And they wanted us to sign on a very particular page. And I said, well, why this page? And he said, that's our story. So when we were working on the book, Jen runs the Golden Ratio platform on social media, as many of you know. And many times we sent shout outs to the whole community. There are more than 1 million followers at this point, asking for examples of different points that we were looking for in the book, to really bring it to life with anecdotes. And this young, like 30-something-year-old guy named Thomas from Chicago wrote this really heartfelt story about how he met the love of his life walking his dog. And the dog insisted on pulling him towards this other dog that was attached to a woman he didn't know. And he was like, what's going on here? And they ended up striking up a conversation for about 45 minutes, decided to pick it up over drinks a few days later, and then they got engaged. And so this was all like a year ago when we finished the manuscript, and there have been many times when I've wondered, I wonder if Thomas and his fiance are still together. I wonder if they got married. So not only did they get married, they're having a baby next month. And that was a really beautiful thing.
I mean, that sounds crazy to me. Do you know of like any other people ever who would have met a future spouse by walking their dogs? I just can't imagine that that's a common thing.
So I met my husband number 2, husband number 1, my one and only husband, walking dogs in our neighborhood. I knew him as a neighbor. He lived around the corner. We would stop and chat. Sometimes we were both married to other people. And when my first marriage went south, excuse me? When my first marriage went south, I kept the dog. And unbeknownst to me, he was 2 years separated. So we started running into each other more often and talking more. But our dogs didn't get along. So we'd have these conversations from 15 to 20 feet away on the sidewalk, and sometimes from across the street. But it all worked out swimmingly. Yeah.
I like John too. I like Sadie, but I like John too.
Well, John likes you too.
All right. So that's the process of writing the book. Was there a part of the book that like you sort of struggled with? Because I struggled with the kids section because I was like, I'm not interested in kids, Stacy, so you're in charge of the kids chapter. Was there part of the book that was like maybe less interesting for you or less engaging, or do you just love every chapter the same like they're your children?
I wouldn't say that I love them all the same, but there weren't any that were sort of stumbling blocks for me. I think like you, and I want you to talk about this, the end of life chapter, the loss of a dog, is particularly near and dear to my heart, and I know it is for you too. And one of the things that I wanted you to talk about is I've just had one dog at a time during adulthood. And every single time my dog has died, they've lived really, really long lives. I knew they weren't going to live forever. The first 2 dogs lived to just shy of 14 years old. And our current dog is somewhere between 7 and 9. She's a rescue, so we don't know for sure. And she's still got a lot of puppy energy. Hopefully she's going to live for a long time. I can't imagine. So Jen's squad typically has 5 to 7 dogs at a time. And when we first met, she had lost 2 dogs in the previous 6 months. So given all the dogs that have come through your home, and how many is it at this point?
Like 40.
Yeah, over the years. How do you deal with the death and the grief continuously?
To be clear, not all 40 of them have died.
Right. That's
10.
true. Some of them have gone off to be
fosters.
adopted by other people, and you still have 5.
Yes, we have 5 now. We have lost 10 since 2019, which is
That's a lot.
when that started. Yeah. No, it's like super hard, right? And I feel like part of me kind of broke in the middle of there because it's just a lot. And some of them are very close. Twice we've lost 2 dogs within a week of each other because we take in hospice cases, so you know that they're not going to stay long. I think part of it has taught me, I don't have any kids, and I very intentionally don't have any kids because I'm like, that all seems terrible, you guys. Like, and yeah. But there was one point when we were up to 7. We usually keep it at 5 or 6. 4 feels very small, which I know sounds crazy. 7 always feels like a lot for us. And there was one point we were at 7. For those of you who follow the dogs, this was St. Patrick and Parmesan. And so we had 2 hospice cases at the same time. St. Patrick would only eat spaghetti, like with red sauce. So, a couple times a week we would make a big batch of spaghetti and keep it in the fridge, and he had to be hand-fed the spaghetti with red sauce. It was just like fistfuls of spaghetti. The other dog would only eat this canned dog food called brats and tots, which were like these little meatballs in like a gravy sauce, which also had to be hand-fed in different rooms, right? And then there's like 5 other dogs that also need to be kept away from the spaghetti because they all would love the spaghetti. And just you can just imagine like what a mess mealtime was twice a day, right? Hand feeding spaghetti and like meatballs and gravy. And I was like, well, this is fine. Like, of course I'm gonna do this for them. And then it's like after we lost them, then you suddenly realize how much you were doing to keep them going. But there was no hardship in it at the time, just a lot of cleaning. And at some point I realized this must be how parents feel about their kids, because otherwise we would have died off as a species a long time ago. Because like there's no way I would do that stuff that people do for babies. But I will do it for dogs, right? And it's like kind of the same thing. So that was a thing that I feel like was really useful for me to be able to share in the book, to kind of be able to articulate that. And then when we got to the chapter on grieving, which was really important for me, and you, before you joined the book, I had a back and forth with my editor where I wanted these end-of-life chapters, and he really had this vision of it as like a self-help book, and I was like, I'm not writing a self-help book. But I'm like, we'll work it out, because eventually I'm going to have an editor, and I'll write whatever I want, and he doesn't get a say in it. And so when you came in, part of it was like, okay, like Stacy gets the way that I want to take this. So I was really invested in those chapters. And have any of you listened to the audiobook? Okay. So you get to hear me cry reading the audiobook. Because and they left the crying in there. Because I've done some of it right when we've had to say goodbye to dogs, and I've done some of it not as well as I should have. And I try to be very straightforward about all of that with people, because I feel like it's hard-earned experience, and you've had 3 dogs, and I've lost 10 in the last 4 years, so I've got a lot more hard-earned experience, right?
I know.
And so I've got stories in there of like, here's a dog, my dog Riley, who, if you guys follow me, you know my boyfriend Riley. We waited too long with him. And I've got the whole thing in there, including, I believe the line, "I will never forgive myself," is in the book, talking about that. And when I sobbed my way through that reading the audiobook, I was telling the producer, I'm like, this feels like a way that mistake is not going to be in vain. You know, it's something that like I can share with people, so when they're dealing with that, they at least have some of the benefit of the insight that I gained. And I will say my therapist, Dr. Therapist Dave, who you met, he came to one of our other events, he read the book, and he actually specifically called out that section where I said something like, I would rather say goodbye to a dog 2 weeks earlier than they would have their worst day than to do it 2 days too late. Like, that's a lesson that I took from Riley. And he said to me, you know, that just clarified things for me so much. Like, his dog Butters is fine, but he's like, I think sometimes about having to say goodbye to Butters, and like hearing that from you just really clarified the way that I would think about it. So that's one thing that I'm glad to kind of have that in there. One other thing that I tried to do in, you know, the first draft that made it into the final chapter was to talk about, you know, how do you do it in the best possible way? Because it's gonna suck, you know, it's gonna be terrible no matter what. And are there, you know, aside from like the mistakes, are there things that you can do right? The one thing that we talk about in there is doing the last best day.
I love that.
Which you don't get to do with every dog, right? Sometimes, and you've had this, right? Sometimes you just lose them suddenly. They're fine, right, and then they're not, and you don't have the chance to do that. But if you have the chance to do a last best day, so you see that it's kind of getting to time, and you can talk to your vet about this. If you go to your vet and you're like, you know, I think we've only got, you know, a few days left, your vet will often give you a whole pile of medicine to make your dog feel better for a day or two, so you can do whatever you want to do with them. And sometimes you don't even need to do that. So with our dog Hopper, who we lost in June, Hopper had a leg amputated a couple years ago for cancer. They gave her 6 to 18 months. She made it about 20, which we were really happy with. We passed that expiration date. But her remaining front leg had really bad arthritis in the elbow, and so after about a year, she started kind of losing function in that leg because it was just really painful. So by the end, she couldn't touch her front leg to the ground anymore, which meant she couldn't use the bathroom. We had to carry her everywhere. So it was like very clearly time to say goodbye to her. But other than that leg, she was fine. Like she wanted to play, she was engaged, she felt okay. And so when we kind of realized, you know, this is the day, I sent my husband Ingo out and he bought Hershey bars because she was one of those dogs who would, if you were eating chocolate, like try to get the tongue in there, just the face right in front of you. She was like always obsessed with chocolate, and I was like, well, she can have whatever she wants. So we live most of the time down by Key West. So we took her out on the paddleboard at sunset. I was on the paddleboard. My husband kayaked along, and we took her out in the water. You know, the water's like 80 degrees out there, and took her out for sunset. We snuck her into the neighbor's pool, which I'm sure that they weren't there. I'm sure they'd be fine with it. Because she loved to fetch balls in the water, but she couldn't really swim with that front leg anymore. So my husband would throw the ball, and then I kind of scooped her up underneath, and I'd run her in the water over to the ball, and she'd grab it with her mouth, and I'd run her back so she got to like do some fetch. We did some fetch on the ground where we'd roll the ball at her, and she'd like push it back with her nose at us. So it was just great, like all of her favorite things. And then we gave her a little bit of the chocolate at home, but I think she just thought that like we were making a mistake. And so we brought her into the vet, soaking wet. Like every time we bring a dog to the vet, it's soaking wet, even if it's to say goodbye. And they put us in their acupuncture room, which is like nice, like kind of meditation space, and said, take the time that you need. And so I started giving her, Ingo got king-size Hershey bars. Started giving her, you know, one little square at a time because you can break them off. And eventually she realized I was doing this on purpose. If you have a hunting dog, you've seen them sometimes, their ears will come way up on the top of their head. That's what she was doing. And I'd be like, yeah, you can have another. And she'd like look at me, look at the Hershey bar, and I'd give her another. And you could just see like her mind was like blown at how good this chocolate was, and that she got to keep having it. And she'd eat it very carefully, eat the square, and then like look at us and look at the Hershey bar. And eventually, if you've had to say goodbye to a dog, the process is that they will come in, they'll start an IV, and then the dog gets propofol, which is the same anesthetic that we get when we have surgery, just to put them like to sleep. And then they'll give them the euthanasia drug after that. So the vet comes in, she's starting the IV, we're feeding Hopper the chocolate. Like, okay, it's like time to do the medicine. And so she hooks up the propofol just to help her go to sleep. And we got her down on her side, and she's still like looking at us, looking at the Hershey bar. And I'm like, give her another square. And she like literally like fell asleep with that propofol with the square of chocolate in her mouth. She ate almost the whole bar. I did eat the last 3. I felt like I earned them. But it was like just the best way to say goodbye to a dog, right? It was terrible. I had her since a puppy. I still cry about it all the time. I've now just told this story enough. I used to cry telling this story like as of a week ago. I've told it enough that I don't quite cry every time. But like, what a great way to send your dog off, just doing like all of their favorite things that they are able to do at that time. And so these are the kind of things like in that last couple chapters where we really talk about, it's such a hard thing to go through. How do you do it in the best way possible? And, you know, how do you deal in the aftermath? Because it's terrible. And I guess the thing that I'll end on after this very long answer to your question.
That's okay.
Is I have really come to feel that like how intense that pain is after you lose a dog is a gift, and it is a thing that I am really grateful for at this point. Because people will DM me after they've lost their dog, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to feel like this. It is so overwhelming. And I'm like, but you have to be so grateful for how much that hurts, because that is a physical and emotional sign of how close your relationship was with that dog. If it didn't hurt, like, what does that say about the connection that you had, right? The fact that it hurts so intensely and sharply is just such an honor for all of that life that you lived together. And you gotta embrace that, right? And like, that's the thing that you go through to reflect how good the relationship was. And it's okay. You know, you're gonna get through it, and it's gonna get better. So there we go. You got a lot of short answers, and I got one really long one.
That is okay. I think it's time
Yes.
to answer questions from whoever has them.
I have the mic. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand and I will make my way over to you.
Yeah, we need to use the mic so the live stream people can hear your questions. We got one up here. Well, Stacy's mic is sensitive enough that she might pick up your question.
Well, that's actually true.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
sensitive enough? Okay, great. Serious question and fun question. Serious question is, what advice do you have for people on effectively communicating science? Whether it's a fun topic like dogs or something that more serious that you might deal with other writings or other work that you do. Fun question is, what's something like memorable that one of your dogs has done recently that you would like to share?
So we should I think we both have answers to the communicating science from very different perspectives. I'll give a short answer on mine, I promise. So like as a scientist, a thing that I see a lot in my colleagues, because I do a lot of like news and like talking to reporters and stuff, which is a variation on this theme, is that the scientists were like so concerned with like the details being very precisely right. And that's actually a really crappy way to talk about science to the general public, because they're not doing the science. They just want to understand the science. And so the thing that I kind of tell people is like, you really got to get the science across, one, so they have the gist of it. That's what they need, just the gist of it. And two, if you can do it in a story that they can go like tell somebody over cocktails, right? Just like, oh, I've got this cool story to tell you. And they can repeat the story that you tell about the science, like then you've won. Even if they get the details a little bit wrong, because they understand like the main idea and that's what you want to communicate. That for me as a scientist is like the biggest change, to go from like, how am I going to talk about it to my colleagues, which is all about the boring details, to telling the public. So it's like a fun, engaging story that they can repeat. But now you do it from a different, you're not a scientist. You do it from a different perspective.
No, but interestingly enough, my friend Amy is in the audience, and I have worked with her and her group. She runs the Science Communication Network, working with scientists to translate their findings and make it palatable to the media. And so what I always say is, you need to describe the findings in layman's terms, make it accessible, avoid jargon. Explain, this is what we found, this is why it's significant, and then make it relatable in some way. Like give a take-home message of some sort, like translate it into real life terms. So that's that. What was the fun question?
Fun thing that or crazy thing that your dog has done lately.
Lately, you want to go first? What? Oh, so somebody gave us, Mr. Potato Head, the toy. So on Monday, no, don't feel bad about this. On Monday, somebody who came to this event in Chicago brought us gifts of dog toys for our dogs. So Jen's got 5 dogs and she got 1 toy, and I was actually wondering, that's a great toy, but like, how is that going to go down at your house? Who's going to get the carrot first? Whereas Sadie, my dog, got a Mr. Potato Head, and I was gone for like 30 hours. When I walked in the door, this is a 2-part answer, she did a complete happy dance and swung into circus dog mode, literally running in circles, jumping in the air, like just doing acrobatic tricks. I'd been gone 30 hours. It's not like I'd been gone a month. And so she was so overjoyed to see me. So I got down and played with her and pet her, and then I fed her and took her for a walk. And then I took out this toy, which is a stuffed Mr. Potato Head that somebody gave me to give to her. And she's just absolutely overjoyed about this toy, to the point where when my husband came home from work, he came in and she greeted him, and then she was kind of looking around. I said, go get your toy, go get your new toy. And she actually went to the Mr. Potato Head toy and brought it out and showed him. She was just thrilled.
Well, so we recently took in a puppy. Her name's Feta. She's nothing like the dogs we normally take in. She's 3 months old. So she's started eating the furniture and the walls, which is like a normal puppy thing. But the big surprise is that Remy, our dog who's 7, Ingo caught him chewing on a chair.
What?
Which he clearly learned from Feta, because she was chewing on those chairs, and so she's teaching the older dogs to eat the furniture. So I don't know what our house is going to be like in a couple months.
Oh, that's not good.
I have been gone for a month, and Ingo is not the best at doing rules. So there's going to be a lot of like hammer coming down when I get home in a couple days. Get those dogs back in line. Other questions?
Thank you for those. Those were good questions.
All right, hello, is that good? Hi, so my question is for Jen. I was just wondering if you could speak on what originally inspired you to post your dogs on social media.
Yeah, so I started, how many of you don't follow my dogs? Okay, there's a few of you, that's fine. We just need to know how much background to get. So my dogs are very popular on the internet, for those of you who don't know them. I started the Golden Ratio account right after Trump got elected in 2016. My research is based generally on social media, and like everybody was angry. Like it didn't matter who you voted for, just like everybody was angry. And I would just like wake up in a panic every morning. I'd open my eyes and I'd be fine, and then I'd realize like, oh, I have to look at my phone and see like what new hellscape is facing us today. And I just like needed a retreat from that, and I could not find it online, a place to go and just like not have that anxiety. And so eventually I was like, well, I have 4 Goldens at the time. That's pretty nice. So I'll just start putting them up there. And I think that really resonated with people because a lot of people needed a space to just escape that was like wholesome and fine. And then things kind of didn't get better. They just got different. And so we kind of grew pretty steadily. We did a lot of collaborations with We Rate Dogs, who's much more popular than us on the internet. But we did like, this was 2017, we did like some Snapchat takeovers from them, like that got us a lot of followers. And then when we hit the pandemic, we saw another big surge because like everybody was home and also just needed something else to think about. And Ingo and I had a rule that like we didn't talk about COVID on the dog channels until like 2021, because I'm like, everybody knows about COVID. They don't need us to also tell them about it, right? So we really have always intended it to be like an escape. And it's not that we don't care about stuff that's going on. It's just like everybody needs to take a breath sometimes, and that's why we did it, both for us and for everybody else. And that seems to work.
Yes, hi. As a scientist, have you found some sort of defective gene in people that don't like dogs?
I dated a guy once who didn't like dogs. And that was the big, out of all the messed up relationships I've had, that was the worst one. So I like your hypothesis, and I feel like I have anecdotal evidence to support it, and maybe that's a new project. We're getting close to the end, but we maybe have time for one more.
One over here.
Hello. My question is also for Jen. I was curious as to what it's like to share so much of your and Ingo's personalities and having to share the highs and lows of your dogs, and also how and why Vink is the cover, besides that she's great. So.
Yeah, so my dog Vink is on the cover. I took this picture. I'm very proud that I took the cover photo. She's just like a ball of sunshine. She's the happiest dog I've ever met, and I live with golden retrievers, so they're all kind of happy, but she is just amazing. And so when we kind of talked about our vision for the cover with our editor, I was like, I think I can take a picture like this. Like, let me try before you hire somebody. And I had a whole room of my house set up as a studio, and she, I get her to sit for like 30 seconds. And so I just bring her in and like hold up a snack and then like take as many pictures as I could. And then we did it for like 3 days. And Stacy, I was like, what about this one? What about this one? For like 3 days, just kept texting him. And then we finally got this one, which worked. For us sharing, like, it's so weird. We post these daily videos of the dog's life, and some of them are like literally like we're still in bed in the morning and like so it's like very intimate in some ways. On the other hand, like we have a kind of unwritten but have developed a set of rules about stuff we don't put on there. So for example, you will never see the dogs going to the bathroom on the snaps unless Ingo screws it up. Occasionally there's like a background dog going to the bathroom, but like we don't put that on there. Mostly because like I hate people making scatological jokes generally, and I don't want them about my dogs. And so, that's fine. Like people can do that, but like I don't want it, and so you don't get to see that. And like if you want to see that, there's a problem, right? Like you can go, there's other accounts for that. But yeah, and it's an interesting. Like Ingo and I don't have any arguments about this. We're both very deferential to each other, so if I'm like, don't take a picture, don't take this video of Feta like licking my face, like he just stops and does that. But we we have different preferences for it. So I'll be like, could you please like close the closet doors before you take the videos? That man is incapable of closing the closet door. It's one of my pieces of marriage advice for everybody is that there's things you can be annoyed at your partner for not doing, and then you could just do it yourself, or you could be like, why don't you do this thing? And eventually I was just like, it does not matter how many times I tell Ingo to close a door, a closet door, a cabinet door. He's just not able to do it for whatever reason. And so most of my time moving through the house is just I close every door I go past on the way. I would love it if he would close the damn pantry door when he takes the breakfast snaps, and he will not do it. So it's, you know, it's fine. So you get to see the inside of my closets, which I guess is okay. So yeah, you know, it's a little, there's some care there to make sure that neither of us feel like overexposed or certainly like that there's no humiliation in there. We don't want people making jokes about us. But yeah, otherwise, you know, I think being vulnerable in a way that like we would be with anybody who comes over is something that people appreciate. And because like we're not trying to like optimize their statistics, we just do whatever the hell we want. And like if people don't like it, we're thrilled actually if they leave. And so it allows us to just kind of like be ourselves and give that glimpse into things, and people seem to respond. You like them, you watch the snaps now.
Oh, I've become a huge fan. I check in a couple times a day. I find it very hypnotic, relaxing, and mesmerizing. He has a real gift for this, and you do too.
Yeah, Ingo does most of the snaps these days, and he's very good at it. And so, like, I also have no room to complain about the closets then. Right? I just close them myself. Great. So we're right at the end of our time here. I guess, Nathan, you're going to give us instructions. But thank you all so much for coming and enjoying the book.
Yeah. First, I wanted to thank Jen and Stacy again. Thank you so much for being here, and that was incredibly informative for me as someone who's had dogs for over 2/3 of my life, and I really appreciated getting to hear both of your perspectives, scientific and personal. So thank you so much for that. Folks, we are at an end for the question and answer and the time in here, but we are going to be transitioning over to the alcove area in the bar area for if you want to purchase books or get copies signed. You just head straight over there, and that's where our authors will be setting up. If you are on the live stream, thank you very much for joining us, and if you want to purchase a copy, you can feel free to come by Busboys and Poets Tacoma. We're going to have a lot because we are very excited about this book. So thank you so much again, everyone, for being here, and I hope you have a lovely evening, and I hope you get copies of the book.
Thank you.